Hello, my name is David Lesperance, and in the over 35 years since I was called to the bar in 1990, I've been advising American and global families on the tax and immigration issues involved in designing and executing international backup plans. Along with my legal expertise, I also draw on my experience as a border official while in law school, acquiring Lineage citizenships in several countries for myself and numerous family members, and moving my own family overseas 3 times. Unlike most advisors in this area, I do not take commissions from third parties, such as governments, fund managers, or real estate developers. This allows my clients to have confidence that my advice is unconflicted and agnostic, and always in their own best interest.
Welcome back to Leaving America, the podcast where we don't just ask, what if I left? We ask how, where, and what does it cost? In today's episode, we're going to talk about golden passports, citizenship by investment, and citizenship by lineage. You may have heard of these programs before, maybe in a news article featuring a shady oligarch, or in a whispered conversation between hedge fund managers at an airport lounge. But citizenship by investment isn't just for the ultra-rich, the Peter Thiels or the Elon Musks. It's a legitimate, legal, and increasingly common path for people looking to hedge against political instability, diversify their options, or, let's be honest, gain a little more global freedom. Some countries will grant you full citizenship, passport and all, in exchange for a financial investment. Not residency, not a visa, citizenship. Citizenship by investment, or CBI, is as wild and interesting as it sounds. So today we're going to break it all down. We'll start by explaining what CBI is and why it exists. Then we'll focus on some Caribbean locations, looking at some of the most popular and surprisingly affordable programs on the planet. And we'll also talk about the risks, because these programs don't exist in a vacuum. And we're doing all of this to help you answer the questions, is this option for you? Who should consider it, and who absolutely should not? Spoiler alert, if you're checking your bank account before paying your car insurance this month, this probably isn't your path. But if you're planning for the long term and can think strategically, even if you're not mega wealthy, there might be a back door you've never considered. I'm your host, Sean C. Fettig, and if you've ever wondered whether a strategic real estate purchase in the Caribbean could double as your escape plan, you're absolutely in the right place. To stay updated on the latest episodes, follow, like, and share Leaving America on the Deep Dive with Sean podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've already realized that securing a second passport might provide more stability than trusting Congress with your future, or you need help choosing between EU mobility and actual democracy, email us at deepdivewithsean@gmail.com. All right, pack your bags. This is Leaving America.
I've been using this analogy, which is a little dangerous for a Canadian to use to an American audience, or a little cheeky, which is I tell my Americans, you live in a political wildfire zone. So what is that wildfire concern? Well, it may be political polarization or political violence. It may be that you feel you're a part of a particular targeted group, and you're worried about racism or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or LGBTQ. Or if you are very politically active, that means the other half of the country hates you. And so clients are really looking at what those levels of concern are. And in a wildfire, people say, well, I'm going to fight the fire. And that's a very noble and good thing to do. I'm going to vote, I'm going to register, I'm going to drive my neighbors to the polls, etc. But no chief drops a crew into a hot zone without having an exit strategy, because it's called a wildfire for a reason. So what happens if, despite your most noble and earnest attempts, you fail to put out your wildfire? Well, you better have the fire insurance of an alternative residence or citizenship and a fire escape plan. And the fire escape plan tends to come into 3 types. One is what I'll call the go bag option. Oh, there's been a hurricane or an earthquake or a literal wildfire. I need to go somewhere, probably longer than 2 weeks, but not so long I'm going to become tax resident in another country. Then the next is, I'm going to leave for maybe the next 4 years or maybe longer.
That was David Lesperance, founder of Lesperance and Associates, which is a team of expert immigration and tax advisors, explaining how a second passport can act as insurance against a failing United States. Citizenship by Investment is a program offered by a growing number of countries where foreign nationals can obtain full citizenship, not just permanent residency, in exchange for a significant financial investment. These investments can take the form of donations to a national development fund, real estate purchases, business investments, or in rarer cases, purchases of government bonds. At first glance, this might sound like a shady loophole for rich people to buy their way out of accountability. And in some cases, that critique has merit. But it's also more complex than that. For many countries, especially small island nations or developing economies, CBI programs serve as a critical economic development strategy. These programs bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign capital that can be used to build roads, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure that might otherwise be impossible to fund. These are real programs approved by national parliaments and overseen by immigration agencies. You're not buying your way into a bribe, you're contributing to national development and being rewarded with a passport. Citizenship offers a huge advantage over mere residency. Citizenship gives you a new passport, which can mean dramatically better visa-free travel options. It also gives you voting rights and access to services in your new country, a legal right to live, work, and do business there, generational benefits, your children can often inherit your new citizenship, and maybe most importantly for some, a plan B if things go sideways in your home country. Let's say you're concerned about, the direction of U.S. politics and society, or future political violence. If you have a second citizenship, you're not trapped. You have options. You can move. You can stay. You can protect your family. And let's not kid ourselves. Americans are starting to think like this more and more. There was a 300% increase in Google searches for how to move to Canada the day after the 2016 election. Imagine what that looks like now. Wealthy Americans, especially those with international business, dual national families, or future-focused advisors, are taking second citizenship very seriously. Here's David Lesperance once again, explaining why this moment in history makes this option especially relevant.
I think it's one of the things is people understood kind of theoretically that this was an important thing to do, but it wasn't urgent. And with the current administration, it has dramatically increased the sense of urgency. So it's kind of like, I should really stop smoking. I should really lose 10 pounds. But it's when you have the heart attack and you survive it, you go, no, today I'm stopping smoking and today I'm going to go lose those 10 pounds. And so this kind of external triggering event is happening. And so a lot of people who are really reevaluating their options and hoping, in the best case scenario is that they come up with a solution. They get fire insurance and a fire escape plan. Even if they don't trigger it, they've got the comfort of knowing that that's there. To them triggering it and, setting up a better life for themselves and future generations. It's just one of those periods of time, which is, important. I'm in Gdansk, where arguably the Second World War started on the morning of September 1st, 1939. There's a little island in the middle of the Gdansk harbor called Westerplatte or Westplatte, which is kind of Poland's Alamo. And this area was known as, for those who are history-minded, the Danzig Corridor. And so the Second World War started one morning, September 1st, 1939, when a German warship opened up on this military installation on Westerplatte. And the Polish regiment there survived for 9 days. There was all kinds of Marines, etc. And I was visiting this pre-COVID. And as you get at every historical site around the world, a very earnest history major is your tour guide, and talk about the brave Poles and how they lasted for 9 days, and how the ship's captain was so impressed that he let the remaining commander, CO, hold his sword as a thing of honor. And there was a group of Poles that were there, but there was also a Polish-American guy from Chicago who, of course, gravitated towards me because I spoke English. And somebody asked, so what happened to the survivors? And they said, well, they turned them over to the SS and shot them all. Whereupon the American guy turned to me and said, yes, my family left in 1938. And our family motto was, the pessimist left and lived, the optimist stayed and died. So getting the comfort of options, should whatever, the trigger is for your particular family, is a comfort. And then if that event happens, being able to move your family out of fire. And again, there is no loss of nobility in, if you can't put out the wildfire of using your exit to stay alive, to continue to fight the wildfire in a different way.
So how does it work? Most CBI programs offer at least 2 or 3 pathways. There's the donation route, where you make a non-refundable payment to a national development fund. Think of it as a membership fee to a very exclusive country club that also gives you a passport. There's the real estate investment, where you buy pre-approved property in the country, typically with a minimum value and a required holding period of 5 to 7 years. Some people resell after that and recover much of the cost. And then there's bonds or business investment. Some countries allow you to invest in local businesses or government bonds. These tend to be more complex and riskier, but also more rewarding in certain cases. So you send in your application, submit your documents, pay your fees, and after a serious due diligence process, you might be granted citizenship. Some countries will do this in 60 days. Others take a year or 2. But it's real. You'll get a passport you can travel with, potentially live under, and even use to renounce your American citizenship if that's something you're considering down the road. So let's take a look at some of the countries that offer the best CBI programs, and we'll focus on the Caribbean. This is a region that might conjure images of rum, reggae, and retirement fantasies, but it's also home to some of the most robust, well-known, and accessible CBI programs in the world. This is Basil Elzecki, managing partner at Henley & Partners North America, a global leader in residence and citizenship by investment, explaining why the Caribbean is such an attractive option for Americans looking for a second passport.
So in the Caribbean, it's often attractive for Americans as well because close proximity, easy flights in and out. Many of the Americans have taken vacations within those regions. But what makes it so attractive is you do not have to relocate to. 2 of the countries would be Antigua and Barbuda or St. Kitts and Nevis. You don't have to relocate to those countries to become a national or a citizen. In fact, it's one of the fastest ways to become a citizen in the world. So you're looking at around 8 months, in under 8 months, with a contribution, again, a donation route. Usually that would start at $230,000 in Antigua, and this is in US dollars, or you can invest in real estate in Antigua, and then you can also obtain a citizenship, generally starting at the $300,000 range. So by making that investment or donation in Antigua and Barbuda, that will get you a citizenship in under 8 months without relocating to the country or being deemed a tax resident.
So here's why the Caribbean is such a hotspot for CBI. These nations are small, often vulnerable to external shocks like hurricanes and tourism downturns. They've turned CBI into a revenue stream, not just a niche offer, but a national strategy. The process is fast, affordable, relatively speaking, and low hassle. And their passports are powerful, offering visa-free or visa on arrival access to about 140 to 150 countries, including the Schengen area, the UK, Hong Kong, and Singapore. There are 5 major players in the Caribbean CBI market: St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, and St. Lucia. Each country has its own set of rules, costs, and reputational strengths, but all of them operate under a similar basic model. You apply, you pass background checks, you invest, and you receive citizenship. We're going to take a look at 3 of the most popular: St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, and Dominica. So let's start with the trailblazer. St. Kitts and Nevis launched the world's very first citizenship by investment program in 1984. So this program has been running for over 40 years. It was originally designed to attract investment and stimulate development in the wake of independence from the UK. Today, it's one of the most prestigious programs on offer, often considered the gold standard. The donation route requires a minimum of $250,000 as of 2023 to the Sustainable Island State Contribution Fund for a single applicant. For a family of 4, expect to pay $350,000 plus. The real estate option requires purchase of pre-approved real estate worth at least $400,000 with a mandatory hold period of 7 years. And the processing time is around 4 to 6 months, or just 60 days if you use their accelerated application process and pay a premium. The perks here are visa-free travel to 155 countries, including the UK, Schengen area, Hong Kong, and Singapore. There's no personal income tax, no inheritance tax, and no capital gains tax. But there are downsides. The cost is high, one of the most expensive in the region. The real estate route may involve overpriced developments you'd never actually want to stay in. And some banks and countries are starting to scrutinize St. Kitts passports more closely due to concerns over past lax due diligence. Still, if prestige and longevity matter to you, and you want a passport with serious international respect, St. Kitts remains a top-tier choice. Antigua and Barbuda is a twin island nation, and it's a rising star in the CBI world, especially for families, because they've made it exceptionally affordable to bring your entire household along. The donation route requires $100,000 for a family of up to 4 through the National Development Fund, and that's not each, that's total. The real estate option requires $200,000 minimum investment in government-approved developments, and processing time is about 4 to 6 months on average. You do have to spend at least 5 days in Antigua within the first 5 years of citizenship. It's not a big lift, but it is a requirement. Antigua is appealing because of the value. If you've got a spouse and 2 kids, Antigua is almost certainly the cheapest legitimate CBI option in the world. The passport also offers access to over 150 visa-free countries. And the lifestyle? Beaches, sailing, reggae festivals, and a laid-back Caribbean vibe. But be aware, infrastructure on the islands can be inconsistent. And you do have to show up, albeit briefly, to maintain your citizenship. And some U.S. banks may not accept Caribbean CBI passports for identity verification purposes. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to be aware of. Dominica, not to be confused with the Dominican Republic, offers one of the cheapest and most efficient programs in the Caribbean and arguably the world. The donation route requires $100,000 for a single applicant and $175,000 for a family of 4. The real estate option requires $200,000 minimum investment with a 3-year holding requirement. The processing time is about 3 to 5 months. Dominica is known for its rigorous due diligence process. It's not just a pay-and-go scheme. Applicants must pass background checks and demonstrate a clean source of funds. Dominica is especially attractive because it's one of the least expensive programs available, period. And its passport is stronger than you might think, with visa-free access to over 140 countries, including the Schengen Zone, UK, and many Commonwealth nations. And the country is stunning. Hot springs, volcanoes, lush rainforest, and waterfalls. In fact, it markets itself as the nature island. But do be cautious because while it is beautiful, Dominica is remote and lacks major international infrastructure. And like other Caribbean nations, its CBI program has drawn occasional criticism from EU authorities, mostly related to transparency concerns. But overall, for a relatively modest outlay, you can gain a second citizenship that unlocks a world of opportunity, or at least a very handy plan B. This is Basil Elzecki again, explaining how and why a second passport might be useful.
Now, you might be asking, well, why would somebody want a citizenship of Antigua and Barbuda, right? Well, first and foremost, the U.S. citizenship is stronger, so why would I need it? In fact, it's more along the lines of hedging your bets, hedging geopolitical risk. So if you were to get an Antigua and Barbuda passport, God forbid there's travel restrictions on the United States passport, at least you have an option to travel. You can travel. COVID was a perfect example with travel restrictions throughout the United States. Throughout the world, in fact. So when you're looking at COVID, particularly, the U.S. passport had at the time, now it has less, but 187 countries that we can travel to visa-free. That dropped down to around 61 countries due to the travel restrictions. Now, many U.S. citizens felt limited, felt restricted, and they said, well, we're never going to let that happen again to us. So then they started to look at quick and easy routes to citizenship, and Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and Nevis were perfect examples of that. So that's one of the benefits. It's usually not to live in the Caribbean. It's usually to have an alternative travel document in case of geopolitical tensions, travel restrictions, sometimes reputational risks in the event there's, God forbid, a war with the United States. You can travel on an alternative passport.
Okay, so you've got the basics down. You invest money, you can get a shiny new passport, and suddenly you're a global citizen with a beach house in Dominica and an apartment lease in Valletta. Sounds like a dream, but tap the brakes. Because while citizenship by investment can be a legitimate and even life-changing path for many, it's not all velvet ropes and private jets. There are real risks, reputational issues, legal gray zones, and geopolitical tensions that can make this global opportunity feel more like a gilded trap, especially if you don't go in with your eyes wide open. There are risks and controversies surrounding CBI programs, so here's what you should be looking out for. The first and arguably biggest risk is reputation. CBI programs have long been a magnet for criticism. They've been called passports for sale, citizenship laundering, and even tools for global corruption. And while these criticisms aren't always fair, especially given the legitimate economic function these programs serve, they've still stuck. You might be a tax-abiding, freedom-seeking American looking to diversify your options, but to a border agent in Paris or a bank in London, your St. Kitts passport may raise red flags, because for years, these programs were notoriously lax. Some countries handed out passports like candy. No real vetting, no transparency. That has changed, however. Today, many CBI programs use Tier 1 due diligence firms like SRM, Thomson Reuters, or Exeger to conduct deep background checks. Applicants are vetted for criminal activity, sanctions, source of funds, and political exposure. Still, some jurisdictions, and particularly some banks, remain wary. You may find your Caribbean passport treated with more suspicion than your old blue U.S. one. Some U.S. banks won't accept CBI documents for Know Your Customer (KYC) processes. You might even be required to show both passports when traveling. In other words, you're not buying anonymity. You're not disappearing. You're just giving yourself another door, and you should know how it's labeled. Here's another thing to consider: geopolitical risk. CBI programs don't exist in a vacuum. They're subject to pressure from powerful international players, especially the European Union, United Kingdom, and OECD. In recent years, these bodies have begun pushing back, hard. In 2023, the UK revoked visa-free access for citizens of Dominica, St. Lucia, and Vanuatu, citing concerns about due diligence and the potential for abuse. The OECD regularly reviews these programs for abuse related to tax evasion and bank secrecy, flagging some passports as high risk in global finance. So the translation is, you may spend $150,000 or more for visa-free travel to Europe and find that benefit gone in a year or two if diplomatic relationships shift. CBI programs are political. They can be renegotiated, shut down, or revised. There are no guarantees. What you buy today could be diminished tomorrow, especially if you're relying on it as a travel or mobility strategy. One example of things gone wrong here is Cyprus. It once had a highly sought-after citizenship by investment program. In 2022, it shut down its program after a bombshell Al Jazeera investigation revealed that passports were being sold to criminals, sanctioned individuals, and shady business people with no genuine ties to the country. The scandal rocked the EU, forced high-level resignations, and led to a dramatic overhaul of how CBI is viewed in Brussels. And it wasn't just Cyprus. Malta also had an amazing citizenship by investment option until recently when the European Court of Justice ruled it unconstitutional. As a result, your dream of buying your way into European citizenship is just that, a dream. Bulgaria also ended its program, and Montenegro. The list of former CBI countries is growing. So here's the takeaway. If you're considering CBI, act while programs exist, but do not assume they always will. It's a game of timing, geopolitics, and public relations. Something else to consider is actually a common misunderstanding. CBI doesn't mean you can live anywhere. So let's say you get citizenship in St. Lucia. That gives you the right to hold a St. Lucian passport, live, work, and vote in St. Lucia, and travel visa-free to about 145 countries. But it does not automatically allow you to live in France, Canada, or even the US. These programs don't come with magic permanent access to other countries. And don't confuse citizenship by investment with residency by investment, often called golden visas. They're not the same. Countries like Portugal and Spain, and now Malta, have golden visa programs that offer residence, not citizenship, in exchange for investment. You still have to live there and apply for naturalization like everyone else. CBI is faster, but the rights you acquire are more tightly limited to the issuing country. And you still owe US taxes. So let's say you go all in. You buy a passport from Antigua. You start a business in Europe. You even open a bank account in Switzerland. You're still an American. And America has one of the most aggressive global tax regimes on the planet. Unlike most countries, which tax based on residency, the US taxes its citizens no matter where they live. So even if you earn every dollar abroad, even if you never set foot in the US again, the IRS still wants its cut. You'll still need to file annual tax returns, disclose foreign bank accounts, and possibly pay taxes depending on your income level and treaty status. To escape this and truly enjoy tax freedom, you'd need to renounce your US citizenship, which comes with a whole different set of complications, emotional considerations, and fees, including the notorious $2,350 renunciation fee and a potential exit tax. We'll be covering all of that in episode 12, by the way, so make sure you're subscribed. But for now, understand this. A second passport is not a tax loophole. It's a door. Whether you walk through it and what you leave behind is a separate question. The final and most sobering risk I want to talk about is fraud. There are legitimate CBI programs, and we've talked about a few of them. And then there are hundreds of websites and self-proclaimed passport consultants offering fake or unauthorized versions. Think diplomatic passports from obscure African republics, fake St. Kitts documents, or instant EU citizenship for $15,000 on Telegram. So here are some red flags you should be looking for. Prices that seem too low. I've outlined here the general ballpark you should be looking for. Anything below that, be suspicious. No mention of due diligence or background checks. Guaranteed approval claims. Payments in crypto only. Zero transparency about fees or timelines. And sketchy websites with no government affiliation. Always work through an authorized agent listed on the government's official website for the CBI program. And preferably, Also engage an independent attorney or immigration consultant with no financial stake in your investment decision. Two of them are on this episode, Basil Elzecki and David Lesperance. This is your legal identity we're talking about. Treat it with the seriousness it deserves. A citizenship by investment program isn't like opening a bank account or applying for a work visa. It's not a side hustle, a bucket list item, or a casual move. It's a deliberate strategic decision that involves real money, real risk, and if done right, real rewards. So let's talk about who this is really for and separate the daydream from the actual use case. This might be obvious, but CBI programs are good for high net worth individuals looking for a plan B. This is the classic audience for golden passports: entrepreneurs, investors, tech founders, and people with international holdings or global mobility needs. They may not be planning to leave the US permanently, but they want options, now and in the future. Think of it like an insurance policy. You hope you'll never need to use it, but if the US continues to go through civil unrest, political turmoil, or makes foreign travel harder than it already is, you'll be glad to have a second citizenship in your back pocket. CBI can also appeal to remote workers and digital nomads who've outgrown the typical tourist visa grind and want something longer term, especially those with families. Rather than string together 90-day stints in Bali, Mexico, and Georgia, they may want to base themselves somewhere full-time while holding a second passport that gets them into Europe or across borders without a visa maze. CBI programs are also good for families planning for intergenerational benefits. It doesn't just help you. In many programs, your children automatically become citizens too. That can mean better school access, better health care, and residency rights. Think of it as legacy planning. And CBI programs are good for political dissidents, marginalized identities, and vulnerable populations. It's easy to think of golden passports as a billionaire's plaything, and often they are. But for members of marginalized groups, especially LGBTQ+ individuals, journalists, or people of color facing persecution or instability in their home countries, a second citizenship can be a form of survival. Basil Elzecki describes why and the trends he's seeing as a result.
In the last 10 years, we've seen quite a shift, not just necessarily close to these elections, but historically, this industry was mainly consumed by second world, third world countries looking for, better pastures, better education, better business opportunity, stability of the governments. So they would be applying to, Europe, US, Canada. These are all hotspots. And depending on their budget, perhaps other countries. Now, over time, in the last 10 years, we've been seeing first world countries consume this product more and more. And I say product, which would be the residence or citizenship programs. So how first world countries are looking at this, and the US is now the number one country in the world that is applying and inquiring for alternative residencies and citizenships. Where it wasn't always the case. So they're doing it, as you mentioned, usually I would say hedging against geopolitical risk. The United States is quite a sophisticated market, and they're very used to having insurance products. How do we diversify? We have our trusts. We have our international real estate. We have our insurance policies. This actually became almost a financial product, a component of their hedging strategy. Hedging where your family can live, hedging where you can open businesses, avoiding trade risk, right? So all these items make it more attractive because it's simply a part of the portfolio. Now, the trend is the United States has steadily and consistently moved to the number one spot in terms of inquiries, where you're looking at almost 25% of Henley and Partners business now comes from the United States, which is quite a crazy number compared to many years ago. We've had, I don't have the exact percentage, but unprecedented growth from the United States. Now, as of recently, any political change, whether an election, whether a law that comes out, whether the US is quite divided politically. So no matter which direction the elections would have went, we would have had demand, where Americans are concerned about what the future of the United States looked like. And they're not necessarily thinking for the next 10 years. They're thinking, well, what about in the next 50 years, next 100 years? If I'm going to plan a legacy so a citizenship passes down so my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids have a plan B, why wouldn't I do it?
Now, it's true, most people in vulnerable communities don't have six figures lying around for a passport. But there are those who do, through inheritance, savings, or business, and who might face risks staying in place like the US, where civil rights are being challenged state by state and at the federal level. For them, this isn't about tax planning, it's about freedom and safety. So those are the folks that CBI programs might be good options for. Let's talk about people who should probably avoid CBI. Anyone who has to stretch to afford it. So to be clear, this is not a good use of your emergency fund. If you're not already financially secure, meaning no high-interest debt, a comfortable nest egg, and income stability, you should not be spending six figures on a second passport. There are other, far more affordable paths to international residency. We've covered some in earlier episodes, and we'll cover more in the future. CBI is for those with extra capacity, not those looking for a shortcut out of hardship. These programs are also not good for people expecting a tax escape hatch. We covered this in detail already, but it bears repeating. Unless you're renouncing U.S. citizenship, you're still a U.S. taxpayer. Getting a second passport does not exempt you from filing U.S. tax returns, disclosing foreign bank accounts, or complying with the FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. In fact, getting a second citizenship might make your reporting more complex. If your sole reason for considering CBI is to avoid taxes, full stop. Call a CPA, then listen to episode 12 in a couple weeks. CBI programs are also not good for people who aren't sure what they're trying to achieve. This might sound obvious, but it's shocking how many people approach CBI like a menu item. I think maybe a Caribbean passport, maybe Portugal. That's not how this works. Before you shell out $150,000 or more, you need a clear understanding of what you want. Is your goal visa-free travel? Do you want to live in another country full-time? Are you planning to eventually renounce U.S. citizenship? Is this for your kids, for retirement, for business leverage? Basil Elzecki describes the things he asks clients in trying to determine which option might be best for them.
So what we would do is we would ask them quite open questions. What is your timeline? What areas of the world do you have an affinity to? Where would you like to live? Name the top 3 places that would interest you. And then that would help us hone down because we offer over 50 programs. Have you considered the tax environment, the safety? Have you considered the education system in that country? Because we do also help with educational placement services. And then we kind of filter down to see which destinations would make the most sense for them and their family, where they'd like to relocate. Most of the time, we have Americans that are looking for at least one of the options is a place with an English proficiency, stability of the government, a good education system, good healthcare system, low crime rates. Then again, climate change can be one of the considerations that they're looking at. And then we kind of filter down the 50 programs into a select few, and we send proposals and we help them with the processes. They don't just do one. Often they do 2 or 3 to keep their options open, depending on their objectives and wealth levels.
If you can't answer these questions with confidence, you're not ready for CBI yet. And let's be blunt, if you're trying to hide from taxes, child support, court orders, or law enforcement, CBI programs are not your ticket out. Reputable CBI programs conduct thorough background checks. They work with global due diligence firms and will reject your application if there are signs of money laundering, criminal activity, or tax evasion. In fact, applying might make your situation worse by drawing attention to your financial activity across borders. Golden passports are not invisibility cloaks. They're paper trails, expensive ones. So to sum all of that up, If you're a well-off, internationally minded individual or family who wants mobility, stability, and long-term options, and you're ready to play the long game, CBI can be a smart strategic tool. If you're just passport curious or looking for a shortcut, this probably isn't the answer for you. Let's say the idea of paying $150,000 for a passport makes your stomach churn, as it should if you're not sitting on a mountain of crypto or a Cayman trust fund. Here's some good news. You might not need to buy a second citizenship at all. You might have already inherited one without even realizing it. This is where citizenship by descent or lineage, also known as right of blood, comes into play. Many countries offer citizenship to people who can prove they have parents, grandparents, or even great-grandparents who were nationals. In some cases, it doesn't matter that you were born abroad or that no one in your family has ever lived in that country for decades. If your bloodline meets the criteria, and if you're willing to dive into some genealogical detective work, you could be eligible for a free second passport. Here's David Lesperance outlining the general idea.
Traditionally, the more money you have available to buy fire insurance, the more options you have available. But there are a number of options available to many people of all classes. One would be, for example, lineage citizenship. If they have the right family history, they may have a claim to citizenship in a Canada or Australia or European country. And if they have access to European country, it doesn't mean that they need to go back to the old country. They actually, as a citizen of a EU member state, they have 27 different choices of places that they can go to. And if that's Irish, they've actually got 28 choices because they also have access to the UK. On the very quick option, for example, Sean, recently with the executive orders on trans children, clients need to move very fast. And the problem with lineage citizenships, even if they have the right family history, is it takes some time. I mean, if you've got an Irish grandmother, it doesn't mean you dial 1-800-I-AM-IRISH and a leprechaun delivers the passport to you. There's a paperwork and a process.
So let's take a look at some standout examples. Ireland is the gold standard of ancestral citizenship. If you have a parent or grandparent born in Ireland, congratulations, you're likely eligible to become an Irish citizen. And that means you also become an EU citizen with the right to live and work in 27 member states. Here's how it works. If your parent was born in Ireland, you're automatically an Irish citizen. If your grandparent was born in Ireland and your parent registered in the Foreign Births Register before you were born, you're also automatically a citizen. If your parent was not registered, don't panic. You can still apply to be entered in the Foreign Births Register yourself. And once approved, you become a full Irish citizen and can apply for an Irish passport. You'll need birth certificates, yours and your ancestors, marriage certificates if applicable, proof of identity and residence, and some patience. Processing times have grown significantly, often 12 to 18 months. Ireland is popular because it's an EU member state. The passport is highly ranked for visa-free access. There's no requirement to live in Ireland, and there's no language test or integration process. Over 30 million Americans have Irish ancestry. Not all qualify for citizenship, but the pool is massive. Italy is another great option. It had one of the most generous right-of-blood policies in the world until recently. You used to be able to obtain Italian citizenship if you had an Italian ancestor who was alive after Italy's unification in 1861. But as of March 25th of this year, you can only pursue Italian citizenship by descent if at least one of your parents or grandparents was born inside Italy. You must prove this generational link through birth and marriage certificates. A caveat here is that if you descend from an Italian woman who gave birth before 1948, you may have to pursue your claim through an Italian court, and that's because Italian citizenship passed only through the male line until a legal ruling changed that. If you feel like this program fits your situation, you can apply at your local Italian consulate. But beware, there's usually a 1 to 3 year wait just to get an appointment. You can also apply through legal representation in Italy, or, increasingly popular, by moving to Italy and applying through residency. It's faster processing, but it requires physically being there. Italian citizenship, like Irish, provides full EU citizenship. It also provides access to Italy's healthcare and education systems, cultural, travel, and property benefits, and there's no requirement to renounce your US citizenship. Germany's citizenship laws are more restrictive than Italy or Ireland, but recent legal reforms have opened new pathways for people whose ancestors were persecuted by the Nazi regime. If your ancestor lost German citizenship due to Nazi-era persecution, so Jewish Germans who fled or were stripped of citizenship, or your ancestor was politically persecuted during the Third Reich, you may be eligible to reclaim German citizenship. Recent updates to the German Nationality Act have removed some of the previous barriers, allowing claims through both maternal and paternal lines, and extending eligibility to descendants who were previously excluded. This is about more than paperwork. It's a moral reparation, and Germany has leaned into that framework. German citizenship also provides EU citizenship, social and economic benefits, and a deeply symbolic act of historical justice. If your roots trace back to Central or Eastern Europe, you may also be eligible, especially if your ancestors emigrated due to war, shifting borders, or persecution. Poland grants citizenship to descendants of Polish citizens who left during World War II or under communist rule. If you can prove continuous lineage and that your ancestors didn't renounce their citizenship, you may be eligible for Polish citizenship. Hungary allows for ethnic Hungarians, particularly from border regions like Slovakia, Ukraine, or Serbia, to reclaim citizenship even if their family hasn't lived in Hungary for generations. Each country has its own quirks, so you'll need documented proof of ancestry, certified translations of documents, and a high tolerance for paperwork and long waits. Israel's program is not strictly citizenship by descent, but it's worth mentioning. Israel grants citizenship to anyone of Jewish ancestry, even if the connection is through one grandparent. This is enshrined in the Law of Return, passed in 1950 and has been used by hundreds of thousands of Jews worldwide. You do not need to be religiously observant or connected to the community. A documented Jewish grandparent is usually enough. If you can show this, you get fast-track citizenship, there's no Hebrew language requirement to begin, and it's a political statement, a lifeline, for many Jews in rising authoritarian or anti-Semitic environments. But, and this is important, Israel's security situation, its complex political landscape, and what's happening in Gaza make it a very specific kind of choice, not a generic plan B. So, in sum, if you're sitting on a family tree that includes European or Jewish roots, go dig it up. You may already be eligible for a passport that opens doors across continents. Unlike CBI, citizenship by descent is typically low cost, emotionally meaningful, and incredibly powerful. But it requires diligence, paperwork, and often professional help to gather and authenticate the necessary records. If you're serious about leaving America or just expanding your options, this is the path with the highest return on investment. It's not fast and it's not simple, but it's yours if you can prove it. And in a world where nationality is increasingly weaponized, inherited citizenship is one of the most elegant workarounds, a quiet loophole with life-altering consequences. So at this point, you might be asking, what does it actually mean to have a second citizenship? Beyond the passport, beyond the headlines, what does it represent? So let's talk about that. Here's the thing. In a world where political instability, climate disruption, economic volatility, and polarization are on the rise, mobility is power. A second passport is a tool. It's an option when your first one becomes a liability. It's access when your original nationality begins to close doors. It's a future-proofing mechanism for those who see the writing on the wall and don't want to wait until the flames are licking the doorframe. Americans, for most of modern history, didn't think this way. We were the passport people envied. We didn't need backups, we were the backup. But that's changing. The COVID pandemic laid bare how quickly global privilege can erode. American passports, once among the most powerful in the world, were suddenly unwelcome in Europe, Asia, and even Canada. And in post-Roe, post-BLM, post-January 6th, post-2024 election, more people are asking, what happens if the country I grew up in stops functioning? David Lesperance describes how this could play out politically and what that might mean for Americans looking to start over abroad.
I think the disquiet, uncomfortableness will continue on throughout the entire term of the current administration. I see anger, political polarization, and unfortunately political violence increasing. I'm not sure if we're going to see kind of another January 6th. I think we're going to see more of small groups or lone wolf, think Oklahoma bombing types. And that's what we've seen. The issue with that, we're going to see, we look at mass shootings, those are generally done by, lone wolves or small one or two people. But they have a huge kind of ramification. And it's not just the victims that day, it's the fear and concern that are going in. So Scott Galloway, who does a podcast with Kara Swisher called Pivot, talked about how he had moved to the UK with his young children, or I guess they're not that young, in high school children. And he was saying it wasn't until I moved from Florida to there. And he says, it wasn't until for a while, I realized why I wasn't so anxious. And he said, well, and then I realized I used to, every time I dropped the kids off at school, I'd think, is today going to be the day? That every time I saw some helicopter circling a building, I'd focus to see whether it was my children's school. He said, once or twice a month, I'd have to, talk my children down because they saw somebody on the internet or on TV that was killed that looked like one of their friends. And he said, and in most of the world, you just don't worry about this. Yes, there is crime and, shootings, etc. But one or two a year, if you think of the Christchurch events, that was an extreme rarity. Well, how many other events of that number or more have occurred in the U.S. since then? 100. So it's the reality of political violence, I think, is going to increase, and the fear of the potential of political violence will increase, and that will be enough of a force to drive more and more people to overcome their life inertia. I mean, I've been dealing with Americans both inbound and outbound for 3.5 decades, but I have never been as busy as I have in the last 5 years and in the last year. And since the election, it's been extraordinary. And I can just see that continuing. We're now, when we're taping this, we're less than a week away from the Oval Office meeting with Zelensky and Trump and J.D. Vance. And I can tell you that the world is in a shift, and that's going to continue. So there is the old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. And I think nobody anywhere on the political spectrum will argue with the fact that we are living in interesting times. And there are other groups that are worried about the second Chinese curse, which is, may you come to the attention of the emperor. So I have clients who particularly feel they're on lists or at higher risk, and they have a greater fear of the wildfire coming. They could smell the smoke. And that will continue, I think, to accelerate, unfortunately.
Golden passports are not just for oligarchs and tech bros anymore. They're for families, freelancers, parents who want their kids to go to university in Europe or just go to school without getting shot, LGBTQ plus folks who no longer feel safe in red states, or maybe anywhere in America, retirees who don't want to risk healthcare roulette. They're for people who love America, or used to, but no longer trust it to protect them. At the same time, it's important to stay grounded. A second passport won't save you from existential despair. It won't make your marriage better or solve your midlife crisis. It's not a moral upgrade or a political statement. It's a legal tool, a transactional decision, a key, but not a roadmap. And it comes with its own baggage. Depending on where you go, your new passport might carry stigma. You might get hassled at borders. You might find that the real estate you were required to buy was overvalued and hard to resell. You might be affected by diplomatic shifts that reduce your passport's value overnight. You might also discover that even with a new passport, you're still a foreigner. Integration doesn't come automatically. Citizenship is a beginning, not a conclusion. So be honest with yourself. Do this for the right reasons, not to run away, but to move forward. There's something else here too, something more meta. Citizenship by investment programs reveal a truth that most people never confront. Freedom is not equally distributed, and increasingly it's for sale. We're entering an age where nationality is no longer a fixed identity, it's a negotiable asset, where the world is split not just by borders, but by access. Visa access, health access, economic access, safety access. If you have money, you can move. If you don't, you stay. This is the unfortunate reality of global inequality in the 21st century, and golden passports are just the latest expression of that divide. But recognizing that doesn't mean rejecting the opportunity if or when it presents itself. It means engaging with it ethically. It means understanding that privilege can be a platform, not just a shield. It means realizing that mobility is both a right and a responsibility. If you choose this path, choose it with eyes open, and never forget that this path is only available to a lucky few. If you've made it this far in the episode and the series, it's likely you're not just curious, you're considering. You've felt the anxiety creep in. You've watched the news with a sense of detachment and dread. You've wondered, maybe even aloud, what if I just left? You're not alone. The fact that you're listening and maybe planning already makes you different. You're not just doom scrolling, you're doing something. Maybe your second citizenship will come through a family connection or naturalization after years of residency. Or maybe it will come through CBI, a transaction, yes, but also a declaration that you believe in choices, that you're not tethered to decline, that your future doesn't have to be written in red, white, and blue. In next week's episode, we're going to spotlight South Africa, a country that doesn't get a lot of attention from potential American expats, but has quite a bit to offer. Until then, keep one foot grounded and the other pointed somewhere intriguing. If this episode resonated or made the idea of a second passport feel a little less abstract, share it with someone plotting their own next chapter. And remember, this isn't about giving up on America. It's about not waiting for it to change first. This is Leaving America, because sometimes home isn't where you started.